So if they do that, that's a wonderful thing, but make sure you're paying attention because it has an impact on the limits. Okay? One of the things too about deposits is, as I said, you're under no obligation to do it. There's a couple of different ways you can do it. One is you can use payroll deductions, and anything that goes through on a payroll deduction basis is automatically pre-taxed. You can also make a deposit from your personal checking account to your HSA account, depending on your tax return. Or you can do a combination of the two. You can put some money aside through payroll deduction and put the rest in at the end of the year. We have seen a number of people that treat deposits to their HSA very similar to their IRA contributions and wait till year end, see how things are, see what the cash flow looks like, and then make a deposit when they file the return. That's completely acceptable. The other thing about using payroll deduction with an HSA, which is different from a flexible spending account, is with a flex account, you can only change your mind if you have a qualifying life event during the year. With an HSA, there's no such restriction. So you can start late, end early, change the amount, subject to some administrative guidelines so that we're not burdening the people on payroll every cycle. But you do actually have more flexibility in deciding how and when you want to do these deductions. When we get to the open enrollment meeting, we'll talk more specifically, but there are two types of deductions if you decide to make an HSA. One is your premium contribution. Currently, if you're enrolled in the Century Preferred, there's a deduction every pay cycle for having access to the plan. It's just to be enrolled in the plan, there's a cost. It's your premium percentage. There will also be one of those to enroll 9 and up. If you want to make a deposit to your HSA, that's actually a second deposit. It's a second transaction. So just don't think because you checked off the one, it takes care of both. If you get there and you want to actually make a deposit to your account, it's a second piece of paper. In overall, we'll talk about that more, but I just wanted again to highlight that. Slightly different way to look at the same information, but what I wanted to highlight here is in the middle section, it talks about what happens after your deductible. Medical services in-network are paid at 100%. They're paid at 80% of basically the approved cost. If you go out of network, that means you're going to pay 20%. But that may not be it. Just like with your current plan, if you go to a non-network provider, they're not required to recognize the agreement with the insurance company. That's what makes them a non-network provider. They can balance billing. So in the example I used earlier, if you go to a non-network provider, they may not bill you the $110. They might bill you the $150. We call that balance billing. And if they don't write off that differential, you're responsible for the full $150 to that doctor. But only $110 is going to count towards the cost of your program. So anything that's technically part of a balance bill does not count towards the deductible, and it does not count towards the out-of-pocket. So again, with this program, it's very important to stay in network to get full value from it. I don't know that that'd be much of an issue. The historical use of non-network providers in South Windsor is very, very small, but I just want to make sure we highlight about this plan those implications, because while it's true under the current plan, the amount of the cost shares and stuff are very, very different. So we want to make sure that it's clear. And then the prescription co-pays, the amount that's shown up there are the retail co-pays, which are 30-day scripts, $5 for a generic, $20 for a preferred brand or formulary brand, and $40. Those align with the same co-pays you would see under the traditional Century Preferred plan.
Is everything the same with the co-pays? Because I have some that are, I don't know, maintenance that they say there's no charge for. Is that going to change?
We would have to know the specifics. I'm not aware there being, other than for certain diabetics, that cost, and we could look at that with you. I hate to say nothing's going to change. The basic plan provisions are downward across, but there are certain things because it's a high deductible plan. It hasn't changed the contract provision, but it might change how it gets reimbursed. And diabetic supplies are one of the interface things, so we can talk about that. Yes, sir.
So right now, we have an out-of-network physical therapist. We have a deductible that we reach. Is that deductible going to be the same, and then we get 80% of that reimbursed to us?
In the Century Preferred program, if you're going out of network, you're going to see deductible 80/20, and you get to some maximum, and the plan will pay 100% of the cost. Now, if the therapist is writing off the balance, then you're basically paying, we're seeing the plan pay at that level. When you go to this program, the deductible is higher, and so you have more dollars going against that, but if they're still writing it off, you'll see the same kind of exposure.
So, like, the reimbursement that we get now wouldn't kick in until the 4,000?
That's correct. And that 4,000 is for everything. It's all medical services, all prescription services, all members of the family.
And then after the 4,000, you pay 80%.
It's 80% of the approved amount for a non-network provider.
Correct.
Yes, sir.
Was said the prescription's 520 and 40. What was 40?
Non-preferred brands or non-formulary brands? The same as under the current program.
Is the network changing?
No.
Okay.
Network and formulary is identical. Under the high deductible health plan, Anthem has 3 programs that might kick additional dollars into your account. One, you have to be eligible to participate in some of these. For example, Healthy Mothers, something will apply, but I have to. The idea behind that program is if you're expecting and you are within a certain window, that they will provide certain incentives and programs to the new mom, and in addition, make a deposit of up to $200 if you participate. If you do the healthy lifestyle participation, you can collect up to an additional $150. And for certain people with chronic care or significant health conditions or programs available to qualify and complete the programs, they will contribute up to an additional $300 to your account. These are not taxable when they're made, but they do count towards that IRS limit. So if you plan to participate in one of these things, factor it in if you think you're going to contribute at the maximum level.
Does that include belonging to a gym to stay healthy?
No. No, there's a very specific program. The Anthem materials will be available during open enrollment, so you can see what that is. But these are very specific programs run by Anthem Blue Cross. We encourage people to go to the gym, but that's not what will trigger this particular.
That's a healthy
incentive.
lifestyle.
Another slightly different way of looking at the grid, but again, this breaks down the drugs, the retail. There is a mail order component for people taking maintenance medications. If you're on meds for particularly a long time, you can get them at 90-day shots via the mail rather than going to the retail pharmacy. There's a 2 times copay for that rather than paying 3 retail copays. You can get a 90-day supply for a 2-time click. Again, this emphasizes that if you're out of network, you face the possibility of balance billing if your provider will not write it off. And balance billing does not count towards the deductible nor towards the out-of-pocket maximums. On the prior sheet, we did show the out-of-pocket maximums as being $4,000 and $8,000. What that means is if you're in network, excuse me, and you have your deductible of $2,000 if you're enrolled as an individual. If you stay in network all the time, the only additional expenses you're going to have are prescription copayments. While it's unlikely you would generate $2,000 of copayments on scripts during the course of the year, if you do, at that point, the plan will pay your scripts 100% for the rest of the year. That's what that means. It's an out-of-pocket protection for you in case you have an unusual large activity line. Or if you go out of network, it will pick up the 20% you're paying as well. Excuse me. And for family, that cap again is 2 times the deductible or $8,000 overall. Some people think that they have to spend that to get money. That's not the case. That is there to protect your cost shares. So if you get a situation where you've got a lot of activity in a given year and you reach those limits, the plan will pay 100% for your drugs for the balance of the year as well. We talked about this one earlier, but I do want to emphasize the mechanics of using the high deductible health plan are different than the mechanics of using the century preferred PPO. Right now, if you go to your doctor's office for a visit or review, when you're done, you go to the window and they ask you what your copay is, and you pay the copay, and off you go. Under this program, you don't have copays. You either have your deductible, or if it's a well visit, you might be paid at 100%. The standard response is, okay, we'll send a note to Anthem, and Anthem's going to run through the claim system and tell the doctor's office whether you did or did not reach your deductible at the time you had the service. If you had met your deductible at the time you were at the doctor's office, Anthem will pay the provider directly, and you're also done with the conversation. If you had not yet reached your deductible, Anthem's going to send the notice back to the doctor, and the doctor's going to bill you for the cost of the service. So there's a lag here in terms of time. Again, they can only bill you for the negotiated fee amount, or if you cross over your deductible because of that particular transaction, they'll bill you up to the amount that gets you the deductible, and then the plan will pay the balance of that on your behalf. The way the claim process works with Anthem, if you've got a big ticket expense right out of the box, your responsibility is your deductible, and if you're out of network, maybe some co-insurance. So if I enroll in the plan on July 1st, and as usually happen in my house on the July 4th weekend, one of the boys would do something a little foolish, and we'd be down at Children's Medical or wherever, and you have a $5,000 emergency room visit. You don't pay $5,000 and wait to get your money back. That's not how it works. You'll be responsible for $2,000 or $4,000, depending on whether you're there as a single or as a family, Anything above that, Anthem's going to pay to the provider. That's what those deductible and out-of-pocket maximums are for. So you need to know that you've got those caps right on early on. Also, there's usually a lag. I mean, occasionally the emergency room is going to ask you to make a deposit or put something up just because, but typically with facilities and with providers, if it's a medical expense, they're not going to ask for time because they don't know if you think you're done doing it. And so you have time to deal with getting things organized when the bill actually arrives. Now, using my example, something that happens early in the year, maybe you haven't fully funded your HSA yet, you got the board's deposit, but you haven't put any of your own money in yet. If I'm enrolled as a single and I have a $3,000 event that first weekend, I can tap the board's $1,000, but I haven't put mine in yet. The way that that can be addressed is you can either write a personal check or a credit card to pay off the facility at the time that they bill you. You can work out a payment plan with them to match up when your future deposits are going to go in. Or you can pay them, and then as you put money into the HSA, you can pay yourself back. So if I put into my HSA $2,000 over the course of the year in payroll deductions, I've got my $2,000 and the board's $1,000. I can take $1,000 out of my account at the end of the year and put it back into my regular account for the half of the deductible I had to spend. We call that reimbursing yourself. But basically, you are not prohibited from capturing the value of the HSA just because something happened early in the year. You just might have to work on the timing of it.
Do you know why it's real-time prescription but not real-time with the regular other medical?
I think it's because the scripts themselves is pretty clear whether they're covered or not, and what their costs are. With the medical services, oftentimes there's more of a review. And some services are batch billed by the provider, and they clear their accounts at the end of the week.
So I mean, I had a high deductible plan about 5 years ago, and the biggest issue I had was not knowing how much anything cost ahead of time. So like, there was just no cost transparency, and with it being my own money, I felt like I really couldn't comparison shop very well. Has any of that changed in 5 years? Like, is there any sort of law that obligates us to get like an estimate before we undergo routine services or things like
I
that?
don't know that there's a law that requires a prior estimate, but there are two things that you can do. One is on Anthem.com, they have a pricing tool.
Okay.
So if you know what it is you're going to get and you have a pretty good idea where you're going to get it, you can go in and research different providers and what it might cost. You also have the ability to go in, especially if it's a more significant expense like surgery or whatever, where you can go in and ask the provider to give you an estimate of the things that are going to be done so that you can compare that against the tool. You can also talk to the folks in the claim service at Anthem at the 1-800 number, but they are constrained somewhat by what they can tell you because what you think may be going to happen ends up being different. You've got an estimate based on one thing, the doctor did something different. They can't be obligated because the process changed. When the doctor goes in to do something simple, it becomes very complicated. So those are the kinds of examples that change what's on the front end versus the back. But certainly you can go in with the pricing tool and look at medical services. You can also look at prescriptions. You know, going to a Walgreens versus a CVS for the same medication could generate a different cost because they've got different contracts with the provider. Going to see Dr. Jones at one end of the street, Dr. Smith at the other end for the same service might have different costs because Dr. Jones with Pro Health and Dr. Smith is with some other multi-specialty group. They have different contracts with Anthem Blue Cross. You will pay the negotiated fee, but that negotiated fee can be different depending on where you go. So it's important to take the time to look at that. With respect to prescriptions, the thing is we talked about that's different is it's real time. And what that means is when you're inside the deductible, you're going to have to pay for the full cost of the prescription to take it with you. And this is where that pricing tool can be very helpful depending on the types of meds that you might be taking or a family member might be taking. Because certain prescriptions can be pretty expensive. And if you don't know that before you get there, it can be a bit of a rude awakening. And so we strongly encourage people, if they're taking medications, to go online and find out what they cost. I also, Rose is getting a little tired of this one, but this is my personal note. I've done this for a long, long time. I've been covered under an HSA plan for 7.5 of the last 8 years. In between, we were covered under a point service plan while my company went from being Limburger to being part of Gallagher. Well, once we were fully moved over, we got into the Gallagher Health Benefit Plan again. It was an HSA plan. I thought that was great. It was a really good deal and all that. Except I forgot to tell my wife. And she went down on May 3rd with our new May 1st HSA plan with 3 prescriptions, which were not inexpensive. and was a little surprised that they wanted more than $45 when she got there, because I forgot to tell her we changed the plan. Gave her the ID card, but didn't tell her it was different. So I encourage you, when you are participating in the high deductible plan, if you got anybody else that's going to be covered under it, that you explain to them how it works. The other thing is, for those of you that are taking maintenance medications or anything of significant expense, you can time, or try to time at least, your last round of refills in June, so that you can pay one last box of copay-based scripts before you move over. It gives you a little breathing room as you move into the next round. You know, from a health planning perspective, we want you to get the right medications. If it helps with the financing to smooth it in going in, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that as long as your refills allow. But please understand that you have to pay the cost of the med to get out the door when you're inside the deductible. And while you can generally work out a payment plan with a medical provider, it's a little more of a discussion point with the pharmacist. So just want to highlight that. If you're taking no-order medications and you buy a 90-day supply while within the deductible, you have to pay the 90-day cost. Now that's less than paying retail 3 times, but it comes all at once. So again, I would just make mention of that for planning purposes. And there's some tools that we can provide very openly with it.
Did you say that if you do bail, it's 2 co-pays instead of 3?
After the deductible.
Or after the
deductible. There are no co-pays until you've gotten after your deductible. After your deductible, it is a 2 times co-pay for a 90-day supply. But if you're inside the deductible, you're paying for your 90-day scripts.
Okay.
Tax planning. I am not a tax advisor nor a tax accountant. If you've got serious questions, you need to talk to your advisor, but we just want to give you a few highlights. If you make your deductions through payroll deduction, they are pre-tax. If you get the board's deposit, it is not subject to tax. Same thing with 3 things. You can make a deposit directly from your own checking account to your HSA account and claim it on your tax return, so it's a deductible expense. Once the money's in the account, it belongs to you. It's not going anywhere until you choose to spend it, unless you die within the account, and then it'll get distributed, as we talked about before. When you take it out, you want to use it for a qualified medical expense. As long as you do, it's not going to be subject to tax. You get a permanent tax exclusion on money that flows through your HSA account. The current annual limit in 2016, as I mentioned, is $3,350 for individuals and $6,750 for family, not including the $1,000 per year catch-up if you're 55 or older. Those limits include all dollars, employer, employee, and any third party. So just make sure that you track that. You, as the individual owner of the account, are responsible for all the activity in the account. Once the board puts the deposit in, they have no involvement, no interest, no rights to anything that goes on within your account. That's your responsibility. At this point, I'd like to remind folks that this is a checking account. It's different from a flexible spending account. You can't spend money from your HSA if there's no money in your HSA. That's like an overdraft, and that's not allowed. The old college routine about how can I be out of money, I still have checks? Well, it's a checking account. Please don't overdraw it. You'll get dinged for additional dollars. And the reason I bring it up is if you're used to it all with using a flexible spending account, that's not really the case. Because if you promise to put $1,000 in to your account from a Flex, and you've got a $600 expense early on, they'll let you take the $600 out because you promised to put it back in. This is an HSA, this is a checking account, you don't get to do that. So don't write checks or use your debit card for things you don't have to cash. Okay. We talked briefly about it before, the limited use FSA. This is a type of medical reimbursement account that allows for use specifically for dental and vision, so that you can set that up on the side in a year where you think you might have a lot of dental expenses. Basically, people ask, why would I want to contribute to the FSA if I also have the HSA? Short version is really only if you've got a year where you know you're going to max out. Because if I'm trying to save money in my HSA for the future, I can use the FSA first and then draw from the HSA only to the extent that I have to. But if I have a choice between one or the other because of cash flow, I put it in your HSA first, because if you end up not spending it, it doesn't go in.
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
Are those the 6750 for family coverage you can put in? Is that a calendar year?
It's during, that particular value is for calendar 16. You know, the guidelines, the question is the guideline for calendar year? The IRS guidelines are always on a calendar year basis because personal tax years run calendar year. This plan runs July to June. So you do need to pay attention when you're making your personal contributions during which cycle you're in, because these numbers could change again for 2017, probably be higher. And so you could start with different deposits beginning in January. You want to be sensitive to where you are, because one of the guidelines, and we'll talk about it over a moment, is that you want to prorate your participation based on your expected stay. If you don't think you're going to be in the plan for 12 months, you don't want to front-end load your contributions, because if you aren't in the plan for the full year, the IRS prorates what you can put into it. And so we've got some examples around that.
So deductible is.
The deductible runs July through June.
But our.
Your deposit, well, for your personal tax plan, it runs calendar year, but you can schedule it so it runs July through June and tracks what happens. One of the, it's not convenient, but one of the things that helps it from being a problem is you can always go in and change your HSA deposit during the year. If you're making a payroll contribution, you want to change it. This is the last key thing for this presentation, covered versus qualified. A covered expense is something that your insurance plan is going to reimburse you or a provider for once you've met your deductible. Office visits, ER visits, inpatient stays, physical therapy, prescription medications, those are covered expenses. It's something that your health plan will pay for once you either satisfy the deductible, excuse me, and when you're not, it's covering it, it's just accredited against the deductible. Under the dental plan, fillings, annual checkups, circuit repairs, those are covered expenses under the dental program because you get reimbursed for them. The qualified expenses, anything the IRS has blessed as being appropriate use for your HSA money, it's a much broader list. It includes all the things that are covered expenses that are not fully reimbursed by the plans, but it's a much broader list than that. On the two-page handout that we included, there's some samples of what are qualified expenses, also some ideas about what is not. The more expansive list, and I know it's on that link as well, the publication 502. I'm not a big fan of government publications for the most part, so this one's pretty helpful. And so if you have specific questions, you can get in and take a look. It includes medical, prescription, dental, vision, certain over-the-counter expenses. The over-the-counter stuff is getting more and more limited because the IRS is trying to cut back on tax deductions for things that are not actually covered by health plan. But again, a qualified expense, if you use money in the HSA for a qualified expense and it's used for a qualified tax dependent, it will never be subject to tax. So you get permanent tax exclusion by using it that way. At the prior sessions, we got into this. I'll touch on it, and then if people have specific questions, I'd be glad to stick around. This idea of a qualified tax dependent gets a little squirrely if you've got a child who's on the health plan between the ages of 24 and 26. Does anybody in the room have a dependent on the plan between the ages of 24 and 26? Okay. Under the Affordable Care Act, the government says you have to maintain coverage on the high deductible plan to age 26 for qualified dependent. But once a child reaches 24, most of the time they're no longer a qualified tax dependent. Now that's not always the case, but that's mostly the case. And so if you have a child who's on the plan in that magical little window between when they stop being a qualified tax dependent and the time the Affordable Care Act says you can take them off the plan, they are covered under the high deductible plan. Any expenses they incur will count towards the deductible. Any expenses they have after the deductible's been met will be paid by the plan because they're covered under the insurance benefit. However, if they're not a qualified tax dependent that year, you should not use your HSA money to pay for any of their out-of-pocket expenses under the plan because they are not considered qualified tax dependent. You're only supposed to use the HSA. Now, if you think your 25-year-old might still be a qualified tax dependent, that's something you want to talk to your accountant about, because if they are, that's fine. I just wanted to mention, for planning purposes in advance, if you've got a child in that window, yes, they can be covered, and probably are covered under the high deductible plan. Yes, their expenses count towards the deductible. Yes, they'll be reimbursed if they have expenses beyond the deductible. And no, you should not use your HSA funds to pay for their out-of-pocket expenses. Okay? The other thing that came out of that question in the first session was, when my child's away at school, should I give them a debit card for the HSA account? And the short answer is to that, God, no. Do not give them an HSA. You give them an ID card. You give them the high deductible health plan. That's what the doctor's concerned about, if the kid's got insurance. Do not give them a copy of your debit card because they don't know, and they probably don't care what qualified medical expenses. You're going to find a lot of pizza and beer. It happened, I learned that in the hard way. And then you got to back it all out. You can fix it, but it's not fun and it's not easy. So control your debit card. In my house, there is one debit card, I don't know where it is. And just be aware of that. The thing you want to make sure they take with them if they're traveling, if they're in school, any of those things, is the insurance card. They do not need to have access to the debit card. Okay? I'm not sure if you're going. It's a little after 4 o'clock, so at this point, I would gladly turn it over to extra questions if you've got them. That concludes the formal part of this presentation. I do want to reemphasize that this was meant to be an overview. We touched on a lot of topics that are somewhat complicated and we'll go into a lot more detail at the next round of meetings. Prior to those meetings, we'll be getting out the cost comparison information you need between the traditional plan and the non-deductible plan, what the premium contributions look like. We have a very simple Excel worksheet that you can use to say if I have this many services, what's it going to cost? If I have that many services, what's it going to cost? So you can do some what ifs. But to make those effective, I encourage you to open, if you haven't already, your My Anthem account so that you can start to get that cost information. Thank you for your time on a beautiful sunny Monday afternoon.